So here's the list of new features. We're going to recap them really quick. The minor improvements is improved banking connectivity. We'll discuss that briefly. We'll talk about what that means. The Node card reader. So now you can use a wireless card reader to be compatible with QuickBooks Desktop. We'll talk about that too. And a built-in income employment verification feature via Equifax. We'll discuss that too. Those are really minor improvements. Honestly, none of those things really move the needle to the average user. For the ones that are noticeable, the ones that kind of get the new feature flag or the new feature tag from my perspective, is going to be the payment links tracker for people that use QuickBooks Payments, merchant services, the new cash flow hub. And if you're a QuickBooks Online user, you've probably seen something similar in QuickBooks Online, the new advanced mileage tracking. So those are the three big ones that are across all versions: Pro, Premier, Accountant, Enterprise. Now, Enterprise got the bulk of the new features, which is going to be intercompany transactions. We'll discuss that in detail, probably spend a whole 20 minutes on that one. A PO approval workflow, which is an improvement upon last year's new feature to have a bill approval workflow. They now added expiration dates to lot numbers. That's really cool. And lastly, the one that has the potential to be my favorite, when it's complete, item category. So that's a recap of all the stuff that's in 2023. So let's go ahead and dive right into that. So the minor features, the REST API for bank feeds. Some of the banks, including Chase, and I forget which of the major banks, are now pushing to have an actual secure API that transfers information from the bank to QuickBooks or to QuickBooks Online. These improved APIs in QuickBooks Online, for example, allow to pull check images, bank statements. QuickBooks Online users have already seen some of this. They started doing this for QuickBooks Desktop. They have not implemented check images and statement downloads within QuickBooks Desktop, but at least they added the new API features. These new API features will also allow the transactions to push into QuickBooks Desktop without you having to hit refresh. I believe only 4 banks are participating for now, Chase being the biggest one of the group. I tried it. It didn't work for me. I know that's anecdotal, but I find for now, this is just completely useless, completely a non-thing. So it's listed there. It's more of a sort of a roadmap for something better, a better connectivity between banks and QuickBooks Desktop. But for now, I have not sort of seen it in action or felt it to do anything other than just not work. So again, don't be discouraged by that. It'll probably be the next couple of months until we actually start seeing QuickBooks Desktop and banking work through all this. The Node card reader. So QuickBooks last year released a wireless card reader, Bluetooth, that allows you to do complete contactless, chips, Apple Pay, like all these new modern ways of payment. If you have that, I think it's about $50 item. If you have that and you have QuickBooks Payments, you can run a payment from your phone using the Node reader, and those transactions sync up with QuickBooks Desktop. Again, small percentage of the population that will use that. That's why I call this a minor improvement. They are claiming improved performance on AR reports, on aging reports, any reports that contain invoices and payments, because for very large files, these reports take a long time to load. I have not done a formal testing on this, but Intuit has, and it's about a 20% improvement on the speed in which these reports render. I call that a win, even if it's something that feels obscure and not very common. But that's a win no matter what. I think that's a great thing. They also have this built-in income employee verification feature via Equifax. Basically, if one of your employees, and you use QuickBooks Desktop and payroll, goes to like buy a house or something, and the bank uses Equifax for employee verification, all their W-2 and active employment information will be sent to them automatically without you having to fill out a sort of employee verification form. Again, small use case, small percentage of people that will use this, but these are improvements nonetheless worth talking about. They are minor in nature. In the slides, there's an article that kind of talks about the work number by Equifax income and employment verification. So you want to read more into that. That's in the slides. You can click on that and get access to that. The feature that's worth talking about here, this is one of the major features in QuickBooks 2022 and 2023 is the new payment links feature. So traditionally, if you use QuickBooks Desktop and have QuickBooks Merchant, you would have to actually send an invoice to email your client a link for them to pay you electronically. It needs to be derived from an invoice. Now, last year in QuickBooks Online, they added the concept of payment links, which is you sending just a link to a payment that's not linked to an invoice at all. This is going to be very useful for people requesting a deposit or a payment on an invoice that doesn't exist yet, or on an estimate or on a sales order. So the good thing is you can create a payment link, just choose the customer, choose the email, add notes. You can add whatever dollar amount you want. It's not linked to an invoice. It's not linked to a sales order. It's not linked to an estimate. It's simply just, can you pay me? That's all it is. Hey, can you pay me? Okay. So the customer pays you. It goes through QuickBooks Merchant, and it eventually syncs up through your QuickBooks Merchant workflow. Now, you also get a link, an actual URL that you can copy and text it to a customer so they can, maybe do it via text or email it to a customer or WhatsApp it to a customer or Slack it to a customer, whichever way of communicating, instant message, whatever, you can copy that link and paste it in whatever way of communicating your customer for them to pay you without you having to create an actual invoice. Then the customer gets a screen that looks just like the payment screen. They can pay you with debit, credit card, bank, and they pay you directly through it. And the payment comes in your merchant deposit screen, which then you can add as a payment to an invoice. Again, these cannot be linked to an invoice or an estimate or a sales order when you send the payment. It's once they pay you, you can then reconcile that payment against an invoice and add it as a payment to the invoice. So this is a first step towards getting paid or getting sort of a prepayment on an estimate or a sales order, but there's no connection to it, at least yet. It would be nice to see that. That would be super cool, because then, the payment comes in and automatically gets applied to the invoice. That would be cool, but I don't suspect they're going to fix that problem anytime soon. For now, I've tried this. It works well. There's a little dashboard that shows you all the outstanding payment requests. Again, no need to have an invoice created. Okay. Next one is Cash Flow Hub. Cash Flow Hub is kind of two things. One is a graphical interpretation of what is going on with your balances in the accounts that you select. So on the left-hand side, you get to select which accounts you want to include. You can pick one account, all accounts, some accounts, and then based on the accounts that you pick, it will tell you what today's cash balance is, adding all the accounts together, and it will give you a graphical representation of what has been happening to your cash flow in the past. What Cash Flow Hub wants to be, I assume, is a cash flow prediction tool, a cash flow management tool, a cash flow reporting tool. It's not there yet. The bottom half of Cash Flow Hub shows you two extra boxes. One is called Money In, the other one Money Out. Under Money In, you're going to see all the open invoices. And based on when those invoices come due, they're going to show in that graph, whether you choose this month, this quarter, or whatever, to give you a general idea of what is that cash flow you're expecting to see coming in. And if the invoice has already been paid, it will show in dark purple. If it hasn't been paid yet, it will show in light purple or lavender. Same thing for Money Out. If there are any overdue bills or unpaid bills, they're going to show there as a future potential cash outflow. Now, what it does well is that it allows you to select the accounts to represent that cash balance. That's important because sometimes you don't want to include a certain bank account because it's an anomaly, right? The expected cash flow based on invoices due and bills due, it's working well. And one thing I liked is kind of a little, the lighter there is a little link to send a reminder to customers with open invoices. You can do that already in the invoice tracker, but it's cool to see it in there. What it doesn't do well is, or the errors that it has from my testing, is number one, it says today's balance, but it's actually not today's balances. It's all dates balances. It's your chart of accounts balance, which means that if there are any transactions in the future in any of your bank accounts, that is going to affect today's balance. Now, that could be misleading. Maybe that's by design. I feel that we should be able to toggle these. So be able to do truly today's balance based on today's date or all dates balance, because there could be some nuances depending on how you manage your QuickBooks, how you enter future transactions, okay? The bubble says all reconciled transactions, so the little help says all reconciled transactions, but I've tested it. It's really all transactions reconciled and not. So either the bubble's wrong or the coding hasn't been completed, but it's not all reconciled transactions, it's all transactions, period, that show up in that graph. The future cash flow of in and out assumes that all invoices and all bills will be paid. Now, the challenge I have with that is that in reality, this is just not realistic. Sometimes invoices don't get paid, sometimes bills don't get paid. So it would be nice to add some sort of percentage for probability of collection, which will make it a lot more sort of accounting kosher, right? Because we project the percentage of ARs not being paid, and we know that some bills are not going to be paid yet or be delayed. So adding that percentage would be nice. So that's not available now. And something that I really truly dislike, because it's something that they're trying to fix already in the QuickBooks Online version of Cashflow Hub, is taking a look at the uncategorized transactions in bank feeds as a potential proxy for money in and money out. So these are being ignored in the cash flow analysis, and this is useful information, or this could be potentially useful information. So I think that's a missed opportunity there. Again, if truly QuickBooks wants to do something more than what they've shown now for Cashflow Hub to do, and be a true cash flow analysis, cash flow tool, that's missing all that. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up Cashflow Hub so we can see exactly what that means. So you should be able to see my QuickBooks company now. And then I'm going to go into the company menu and click on Cashflow Hub. So right there on company menu, Cashflow Hub, right there, Cashflow Hub under company menu. That opens up the Cashflow Hub. As I mentioned earlier, it's sort of split into two parts. Oh, something to mention, which is extremely annoying, is you have to be logged into an Intuit account for this to work, which means that the data from QuickBooks is being transferred to some sort of cloud database. And this Cashflow Hub computing or report calculation is happening off-site, right? So it's happening on a database somewhere. So you have to be clicking on the refresh button on the top right every time you create a new transaction. You have to click on refresh, again, because QuickBooks is uploading this data to the cloud somewhere and then is recalculating this report. Now, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but this means that your data from QuickBooks is not only in your desktop. That means QuickBooks has some of this data because it requires the data in order to be able to run these reports. Now, is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? I generally trust QuickBooks. I don't think they're going to use the data for evil or anything like that. But your QuickBooks Desktop data, it's obviously not 100% in your desktop file. Some of this data, it's somewhere else. Okay, so keep that in mind. And again, I think that's overall a good thing because I trust QuickBooks Online data to be safely secure. But some people, sort of freak out about that. So I'm just pointing it out before it catches you by surprise. Now, this is what I meant right here where it says today's cash balance. That's what I meant. That's really all dates cash balance. So if I go to list and go to chart of accounts, this is the combination, and I'll just go back and show you. Let's just look at checking account. It says here $41,791.87. That's the balance that is showing up in there. If I go into the chart of accounts, we're going to see in the checking account $41,791.87. That's the reason why I can tell you that's not today's date. That's all dates, because if I double click on this, and I'm recording this on 9/08, on September 08, 2022, I have in the sample file a bunch of transactions dated for the future. So there's an error in nomenclature about what today's cash balance is, or there's no true disclaimer that this is an all dates balance. To me, this is a problem. It's a logical problem. It's a programming problem. It's a UI problem. It's a lack of explanation of what this number means problem. And if a cash flow hub tool is supposed to help you understand your cash flow, it needs to be pretty clear about what that number represents. Okay, so that's really important. Right here on the manage accounts, this is pretty cool. I like this. I can actually choose which accounts I want to include. So let's say I want to include employee advances or retainage receivable, or maybe take out one of the credit cards or one of the checking accounts. If I change the configuration of the account, the all accounts balance change. And the graphing tool here on the right, changes too. But I do have to hit refresh. So the accounts that I use does affect the graph on the right, which I like. I have no issue with that. But this is what I meant. The problem is, notice that this says here, bank balance, current and historical reconciled bank balances. That's literally what it says. Current and historical, I can't zoom into it, but it says current and historical reconciled bank balances. That's not accurate because it does include some unreconciled transactions. So down here, when I scroll down, this is the thing I like, this send reminders. So if I have any open invoices in here, I click on send reminders and it takes me into the income tracker and it prompts me to create a reminder for the open invoices, which is pretty neat. And then down here where it says bills and open bills, it tells you right here what is that expected potential cash flow that could come out of your bank once you pay those bills. Now, go back to the slides here for a second. So that's kind of like the challenge that I have. The other challenge I have, which I think is and this is really complex potentially, but a cash flow tool should also account for payroll, in my opinion, because we're not going to create a bill for payroll. It should also consider memorized transactions. So bills are going to be created in the future. That should also something to consider. So those two things are also being ignored here. Again, hopefully R3, R4, R5, they start improving upon this tool. But that's my take on that. To be honest, I don't foresee this tool being useful for anyone unless these things get addressed. Other than, and to be fair, other than the total balance of all the accounts in all dates, which could be useful in some context, and a nice little graph of your cash. Other than that, this feature doesn't seem to be useful at all. To me, don't want to put any ideas in your mind. You can choose what you think about that. Next feature to talk about is advanced mileage tracking. So QuickBooks Desktop has always had a vehicle manager and a mileage tracking manager, but the difference is that now this tool is compatible with your phone app. So if you have an iPhone with a QuickBooks Desktop phone app, same app you would use to upload your receipts and upload your bills into QuickBooks Desktop, now has a vehicle tracker option, and that allows you to add your mileage that you've been using. And then once you save it, it uploads it to the cloud, and then QuickBooks downloads it, puts it in this list of pending approval mileage. And then once you select any of them, you can approve it, like sort of record it into the books per se. And that's a loaded term, and we'll discuss that in a second. But you can record it into the mileage tracker log as an approved mileage tracker. You can mark it billable, and that's working. So if you create an invoice for those miles, you can get reimbursed from your client. But there's a little checkbox in the bottom that says reimbursable, which we assume is with the purpose of getting paid back. If you're an employee, getting paid back from your employer. But that stuff is not working. It's just there for show, pretty much. Why? I don't know. Okay. So what it cannot do well, the reimbursable checkmark just doesn't work. We don't know what the point is. I would love to know if anybody does discover that. Let me know, because I have no clue why that reimbursable checkbox is there. I assume it's with the purpose of doing something like flowing that into a bill to pay or reimburse your employees. I assume that's with the purpose of flowing that into payroll somehow, into a paycheck. And the other thing that I find kind of useless about this feature, honestly, is that there's no workflow to turn the value of the mileage into a sort of a tax deduction per se. So in other words, mileage tracking is simply just a report. If this thing says that there's $15.74 on approved mileage, that's the approved miles times the IRS rate, or the rate that you decide to give QuickBooks. But the problem with that is that dollar amount doesn't show up anywhere in the books. There's no journal entry. There's just like you would need to kind of know what you're doing, look at this report, and then go, okay, I'm going to do a journal entry for this. I'm going to do a bill to reimburse my employee. So unfortunately, there really just isn't something that affects the financials. That's potentially a good thing as well. I don't want random miles to post into my P&L either. But I'm really honestly trying to understand what's the end goal here. Like, what do we do with this information? Okay. So I don't have the answer to that, but just kind of pointing it out. Let me get my QuickBooks Desktop back over here and show you that piece. So I'm going to go into company and go to track vehicle mileage. Okay. It says there's a sort of a new way to do vehicle mileage, this sort of the advanced version. Then you go to get started. And what you're starting to see, and this is sort of a familiar pattern in the last 3 years of new features in QuickBooks Online, is a lot of these features are being developed outside of QuickBooks Desktop. They're being developed like QuickBooks Online as a website somewhere, and QuickBooks has a little like sort of built-in browser and access that information off-site. The pros to that is you can now interact with your phone app. When we talk about intercompany transactions, there's a huge pro to this, which is being able to send transactions across company files that are not in the same computer. The con to this is if you don't have internet, this is not going to work. I know in most worlds, not having internet is not a thing, but in some cases, it could be a thing. And again, the other challenge is data's out there, right? So for some people don't like that. Again, I trust QuickBooks, so I have no gripes with the data being out there, but that's what's happening, right? The data is now being synced to the cloud, and these features are now exchanging data with Intuit, and they're very Intuit dependent for them to work. And that makes sense why Intuit is now forcing everybody into subscriptions, because they'll be able to develop all this and maintain all this. This annual subscription sort of kind of pays for these extra things. So I would love to see these features as truly functional and useful. That way sort of makes sense to me, paying the higher fees for QuickBooks Desktop. So anyway, you have pending approval and approved. So if you want to approve any of these were actually sent from my iPhone. It tells you who the employee is, and then I can just click on delete or approve. And the approval process, you basically copies all the data that was captured on the iPhone. I can pick which vehicle I'm going to do this with. The way QuickBooks Desktop work, you have to create the vehicles prior. Again, they don't really affect your fixed asset list or your depreciation or anything like that. It's just a list of vehicles. You can mark this billable, which means you can select which customer is going to be marked to. If I uncheck billable, I cannot sort of cost the miles to the customer. So I have to check billable. As I mentioned earlier, still doesn't matter because the dollar amount equivalent to these things don't post anywhere in your books. Then you get to pick your class and your location. I love the fact that, class and an item. I love the fact that they added class and item here and customer, because in many features in QuickBooks Desktop, they forget that. And then there's the useless, reimbursable checkbox that it's there. It's just information you're tracking, I guess, but you really can't do anything with it. Then I click on approve. Yes, approve. And the data gets recorded into the QuickBooks mileage tracker. Up here where it says view report, this is where you get to see all the, let me just do all dates here. You get to see all the mileage across all the cars, how many miles, and the mileage expense, so the dollar amount equivalent to that. If I double click on any of these, it opens up, or in the old version of Mileage Tracker, it would open up the old screen of Mileage Tracker. That's not available anymore with the new version. So you cannot double click on any of these. They're not a transaction the way they used to be with the old mileage tracking system. The only way to view those transactions is to come in here, go to approved, and view them through this screen. So if you want to see details about that mileage that's being tracked, you got to see it through this screen. Okay. The other little thing here that's pretty cool is this little drop-down menu. This is what I mentioned earlier. These are the approved mileage expenses. These are the dollar amounts I was telling you that don't really add up to any transactions. Again, it's up to you, the accountant or whomever, to do something with this at the end of the day, whether it's a billable or whatever. Okay. Okay. And the refresh button still applies. So because again, this data is on the cloud, you have to be refreshing this. It's not being pushed automatically in many cases. All right, let's go back into the slides. So we covered mileage tracking. Again, these are across all versions of QuickBooks Desktop. Okay, so those are the three payment links, the mileage tracker, and the cash flow hub. The three that are for all versions of QuickBooks Desktop. Now we're going to talk about the ones that are only available in QuickBooks Enterprise, and these are the ones that are really worth talking about because they do pose some really potential usability. The first one is called intercompany transactions. So intercompany transactions, and I'm going to make my attempt to explain this as good as possible, is you have multiple businesses, multiple QuickBooks Desktop company files. You're going to link them together via this QuickBooks service, right? We're going to link them together with your Intuit accountant, your Intuit account with your Intuit ID. You're going to link them together, quote unquote. The databases are still separate. You're going to link them together, and anytime one of these entities makes an expense, and this is the only use case now, it makes an expense, whether through a bill or through a check, instead of categorizing this as an expense or sending it to the balance sheet or whatever, you're going to put this into the bill or the check into intercompany transactions mode. And you will notice that the expenses and item tab go away. And this is now sort of a third mode, the bill or the check can behave. And the way these work is you can choose one line, which is basically one company that this one transaction is going to interact with. And you're going to select the GL account in your books where that due to, due from account lives. And we'll discuss that in a second. You're going to put the amount, and then you can choose the class in your company file, the one that's paying for it. So once you create this intercompany transaction, it goes into pending mode. It doesn't hit your books. It doesn't apply to your books. It doesn't affect your balances, accounts payable or bank. It doesn't affect your balances until the other company file approves it. So there is a required approval on the other side. And the approval on the other side requires the user to select which expense account ultimately which account the intercompany transaction post in your GL. But this is the expense transaction in the GL, and then once you approve it, it creates a journal entry. We'll do a demo of this. That way you can see the whole thing flow, because it's very difficult to understand with slides. The way I explain it, you kind of have to see it. But that's essentially what it is. What it can do well is it can create a check or a bill with the intercompany flag and essentially send a journal entry through a related company that has been previously set up as an intercompany transaction with a relationship. The journal entry approval gets sent through the cloud, which is awesome, which means the company files do not need to be in the same computer or server. That's what it could do well. What it cannot do well, and this is going to be a plethora of things. As a matter of fact, I studied this one feature so in depth that I wrote up a Google Doc document with all the features I encountered. It's on the slides if you want to see them. I'm already talking to Intuit developers trying to address all these and see if any of my claims are good and they make sense for them to focus on working, because they need to fix a lot of things on this feature, in my opinion. But again, the R1 gets released. That way we could test it and then we can give them feedback to make it better. So I'm not completely against them releasing something, as long as that something works. But yeah, in my opinion, it's missing a lot of stuff. This is something I have intimate relationship with, because I work with a lot of enterprise clients, and I would say 99% of enterprise clients have at least two companies, a holding company, an operating company, a real estate company, that kind of thing. And there's almost always some sort of intercompany transactions. And I like the fact that they're addressing the issue. I personally don't like the approach. I think it's missing a lot of important things, but you can see the document in there where I kind of go deep into my rant as to what I think this feature is missing. But it can only use bill and check. So if the money came into that account and it's an intercompany transaction, it won't work. So you have to do it the normal way. Put it in the do from account and then manually do the journal entry on the other side. So this is only useful for initiating a payment from the account, from one of the accounts where the payment really belongs to a different company. My biggest gripe is I cannot add a class or a customer job to the transaction. That's a big issue for me, because I use classes and customer jobs all the time. That, in fact, it's a logical problem, a programmatical problem that this feature has in R1 off the bat. It requires approval, which means if the other company file is not being used that often, so let's say I have operating companies that the same group has an intercompany real estate company, and they don't really get to the real estate company 3 or 4 or 5 months in, because that's really sort of a low volume. And the problem is, if you're not actively going into the other company and approving those transactions, this is not going to work. It's not going to post, which means I can't reconcile, I can't move forward until the other side approves it. There's no way to override this. The approval is a requirement. And my biggest issue, which I predict to be the biggest issue with customer support calls for users trying to do this, is both users need to be in the same Intuit account in order to establish that connection. So if for whatever reason one person gets logged out and they don't know the password and they're moving forward and using QuickBooks Desktop and they don't want to go through like an Intuit account password reset or whatever to get logged back in so they can follow through on the intercompany transactions, it's going to delay the whole process. I can foresee this to be a huge problem. So some of the drawbacks of this, requiring an internet connection and requiring an Intuit account, especially logged into the same account, for this to work. So let me jump right to it so we can demonstrate it. And one of the questions I have in the chat box is, when is this webinar over? My webinars are typically an hour and a half. So we are almost an hour in. So we will go over an hour, but I promise you it won't go past 90 minutes for sure. Thank you for the question, Mark. Okay, so we're going to go into intercompany transactions. So I'm going to click on the company menu. Then I'm going to click on intercompany transactions. And I'm going to show you this dashboard. Shows you both transactions that were initiated from the other companies. It shows you transactions that are now being sent to the other companies. And it shows you relationships with other companies. Now, what you're seeing here is a transaction that was initiated from the other company file. The other company file paid Lowe's, as you can see here, $895.25, and marked it as intercompany. So now I am the other side, I'm the other company file that's going to be recording the expense. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose the expense category. Notice I don't have the ability to choose a class or a customer job. That's a big problem. Then I'm going to click on approve and go to approve, and that essentially creates the transaction. Okay, so I'm going to show you what the transaction looks like. So I'm going to click on OK, and basically the transaction was approved. So you basically get to see here all the transactions that were generated from the intercompany transaction workflow. I'm going to click on view. Okay, so now I'm looking at the journal entry that came into the intercompany transaction. Journal entry works perfect. Expenses the expense, and the balance goes to due to and from. My problem with this is if I choose a customer job and a class because it wasn't allowed in the regular workflow and try to save it, it won't let me because this is an intercompany transaction, which is pretty much locked up, which is part of the reason why it also got locked up when I just opened up the journal entry. So that's my single biggest gripe with this. Like, as a matter of fact, I don't have a whole lot of customers that don't use either class or customer job. So this just completely renders the tool useless. However, I'm going to show you, I'm going to start over and I'm going to create the intercompany transaction, log out of this and log into the other company so you can see exactly how to approve it. And I'll show you that little issue with the sub-account issue as well. So I'm going to enter a bill, and let's say I'm going to get a bill from this vendor, and I'm going to click up here where it says intercompany transactions. One big caveat here is that once I put anything on the bill, vendor name, account name, whatever, once I put anything on the bill and I try to click on intercompany transactions, it won't let me. So there's sort of like no logical workflow to convert the start of a process into intercompany. Like, I literally have to clear it out and from scratch click on intercompany transactions, and it sort of switches to this intercompany mode. And it's the same bill. It looks exactly the same. It's the same bill, but let me put here 4,400. But you're gonna see down here, there's no place to pick the expense account or anything like that. What it allows you to pick is company, and there's a brand new tab in the QuickBooks world. Company. What does this mean? This is a linked company that we linked via the Intuit IDs, and then we get to choose where in my GL I want to send this. Now you get, during the setup process, which we skipped, and we are not going to go back to it. During the setup process, you get to tell it which is your due to and due from account that you want to use by default. Okay, so we'll use this one, and then let's put 4,400. And on memo, I'm going to put bill for subsidiary to, but paid from parent A, something like that. Then I can choose the class in my GL. My class, this is not the class for the destination account. Then I'm going to click on save, and there you go. There's one of them. I'm going to go to save and new and do one more. Let's say I'm going to put here 3,200. I'm going to put no memo this time around. I'm going to pick the same. Actually, I have to click on clear, and I have to start with intercompany transaction. I have to remember that. Go back and pick the vendor. Let's say this is $1,200. I'm going to put a reference number. I'm going to put a memo. I'm going to call this source memo, and I'm going to call this detail memo. So just so you can see it on the other side, how it comes in. And let's say this is 1,200. And I'm also going to click on save. So there's two intercompany transactions that are sitting there under pending, and there's the flag there that says pending. These are not posted. So if I go into my GL, none of these are going to be posted. These are pending transactions. If I go into the vendors section and I go into this particular vendor and I go into bills, that bill doesn't show up because it's a non-posting bill. But if for whatever reason I click on all transactions, the bill does show up. So there's a little bit of a logical problem showing in the vendor center under all transactions, but not showing under bills. And the answer for that is because it's a non-posting transaction. But it would be nice for there to be a filter to filter non-posting and posting, or pending intercompany, or pending approval if it's a PO workflow approval, something like that. So that's obviously missing, and that's kind of a problem. So I'm gonna switch out to the other company file. Okay, and I'm gonna log into it so then you can see how these accounts come in. And one of the questions I'm getting is, do the chart of accounts from both company files need to be the same or match for this to work? The answer is no. Everybody can have its own chart of accounts completely separate. That's the point of the intercompany transaction is the transaction gets sent, and then once we go to the approval process, we will save it and then pick the account. So I'm going to go into company. This is the second company now. I'm going to go into company and click on intercompany transactions. Okay, wait until that loads. Okay, I'm going to go to transactions. Click on refresh to make sure all the transactions load, and there they are. So there's the 2 bills that came from the parent company. So these 2 bills came from the parent company. I can either approve or reject them. The rejection process doesn't have a way to put why you're rejecting it. So unfortunately, the other company would just get a straight rejection, and they would have to delete the transaction and recreate it. But before we approve it, it doesn't let me approve it until I pick a GL account. So I have to pick a GL account, and it's only expense categories from now. So I can only pick from expense categories. And if I want to create a new one, I would have to type the account here. So let's say we call this hauling fees or something like that. And I would have to click on add, and then it would add it. So like you can add an account, and that goes into my chart of accounts. So if I go into list, chart of accounts, and it would come in here as hauling fees. It's not here yet because it hasn't synced. Unfortunately, don't ask. But I have to actually finish the transaction. So let me type hauling fees one more time. So this doesn't add it to the chart of accounts until it goes through the approval process. I had an earlier issue where I tried to do like a subcategory here, like to put here whatever subcategory I wanted to do and add it. The problem is if you do that now, especially with R1, it creates an error. So you can't create sub-accounts through this process yet. So you want to use only regular accounts. So let me do hauling fees. There we go. And then now I'm going to click on approve. So I'm going to click on approve. And then once I click on approve, as I mentioned earlier, the journal entry gets created. I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to go into my approved accounts, approved transactions. I'm going to look at my HRank, click on view, and there's my journal entry. Again, I can't change anything in here. There's a tag here on the right that says intercompany transaction, letting you know it's a special journal entry that cannot be edited or changed. If I click on delete, it will allow me to delete it. I can edit it, but I can delete it. One of the challenges I have is if I delete the journal entry, it's kind of one of the issues, is this doesn't get back to approval. So like we lose it, we lost it. So that's something I'll be very careful with as well, because it doesn't sort of send it back to ready to be approved or pending approval. So long story short, don't delete them. Be careful with deleting them unless you know exactly what you're doing. Then I'm going to click here into hauling fees, go to approve. So I am in fact approving this one. I won't delete this one this time. So I go into approved, and then now in my chart of accounts, hauling fees should be there now. There it is. So there's my hauling fees account. That's there now. So you can create accounts on the fly. You cannot do sub accounts. It actually creates an error, and it needs to be approved before that new account gets created. And you can also only select expense account. So those are the sort of heavy limitations with this feature. Okay, I have a lot more sort of issues with this. You can click on that link that's there in the bottom if you want to know all the other issues I have with it. One of the major challenges that this has is that you cannot do one account for multiple other companies. So if you have one expense account that needs to be distributed across, let's say, so one expense transaction that goes across 3 companies, you can't split it. You have to create 3 separate transactions in the source company that's paying it. So you have to create 3 bills, basically, each one for a different company. So you can't split intercompany transactions. Unfortunately, that's another limitation that it has. All right. So let's move on to the bill approval workflow. The bill approval workflow, the bill approval workflow was added in 2022. What they now added is a purchase order approval workflow. And essentially what it does is it sends an email and also a notification to the admin user, to the approver user, that a transaction needs to go from pending to approved in order for it to post per se, even though purchase orders are technically non-posting. But if there was such a thing as a posting purchase order, it will need to be approved first. The screen looks just like the bill approval workflow. We'll do one really quick to show you. And I do want to add a couple notes here. The three conditions you can choose are amount, vendor, and vendor type. So you can create one bill or purchase order approval workflow with one or a combination of these conditions, but you can only do one. So you can't have, like, for this vendor, only trigger the workflow if it's $1,000 or more. And for these vendors, if it's $500 or more, you can do that. So you can pick one rule to dominate the entire approval workflow. That to me is a huge deficiency, unfortunately. That's just how it is now. There might be some complicated logic into that. I'm going to list out the things that it doesn't do well, and then we'll do a quick demo of it. So what it cannot do well is only one user can be the approver. So for now, it seems like the approval has to be admin or some sort of admin accountant level user. There's no way to approve via email or via the phone app. So you do get an email notification, but you have to log into QuickBooks to do this. And this is a problem where the approver is the owner of the company or the controller or a third-party accountant. That person needs to be constantly logging in to QuickBooks to approve these things, which is kind of a challenge. With Bill.com, for example, you can approve bills from your phone. You have to log in to a computer to do this. So that's something that's sort of lacking, in my opinion. As I mentioned, only one approval workflow for bills and purchase orders. You can have multi-condition approvals, just a single catch-all rule. User permissions for the approver are not set up. Like, there's no explicit approver permission. So it's not exactly clear who can approve and who cannot. From what I experimented, is anyone with admin or accountant rights. One of the things that a big gripe I have with this is if both a bill and a PO approval workflow are enabled, and let's say, for example, that a particular bill for a particular vendor has a $10,000 threshold and it goes through a PO approval workflow. Once the bill is created, if the bill is also under the bill workflow threshold, the bill needs to be approved too. So basically you have to approve the PO and approve the bill. There's no like direct workflow that says, you know what, if the PO was approved, allow the person to create the bill because we already approved the PO. So if you use both, that could be a little bit of an annoyance, having to both approve a PO and a bill. Now I get it, for internal controls, those are entirely two different things. Approving a purchase order and approving a bill is two different things. I get it. But for most of our clients, which are sort of small to mid-market, one of the approvals, the PO approval, should be good enough to approve the bill. So if you're using both, that's going to cause some issues potentially. Okay, so let's go into QuickBooks Desktop and talk about the approval workflow. And I'm going to log out and log into the other company where I have this set up to show you. We're roughly about 12 minutes from being done with this webinar. It's because I have one more feature to showcase, which is the item categories. So we're gonna finish with the PO approval and then do the categories. So I'm logged in as an admin. I'm gonna go to company file, and then I'm gonna go to set up approval process. So this is where you configure your threshold. So I'm the admin. I'm gonna say, hey, I'm gonna create a PO approval workflow, and I'm gonna say, let me just create a new one here. And I'm gonna say what the conditions are. So I'm gonna click on setup for purchase order, and I'm gonna say if any purchase orders are $10,000 or more, I want it to get flagged and go through an approval process. I can also say if it's $10,000 or more and it's a particular vendor type. So it's a equipment vendor type or equipment and materials vendor type, or a particular one or a particular set of them. So I can say that the approval workflow only works for these, okay? And the last condition is a specific vendor. So if I don't want to use vendor type, and I want to say, look, for this vendor and that vendor, I only want the approval workflow to trigger for those two vendors in particular. So obviously, if a new vendor gets created and a purchase order gets created, it won't trigger approval workflow. Unfortunately, that's the issue, okay? So it won't do that. The other thing that you can do is not choose vendor at all and do it for everything. Unfortunately, that's kind of the problem with not being able to do multi-condition. It's just one catch-all. Then at the bottom, you say, all right, who approves it? So we have these two users have admin rights. So I guess who can approve it, and I go to set and activate, and that's it. It creates the PO approval. Okay, so now it shows. I had to refresh. That's what it was. Okay, so there's my rejected, there's my approved, and that's it. My approved, I can click on it, and I can actually see the transaction. There's a flag that says approved. Now, how does this work in the first place? Let me log out because I'm logged in as an admin now. I'm gonna log in as a user. That's not an admin. And that user is the one that's gonna create the purchase order, and you're gonna see what happens in here. So I'm gonna go to log in as this user. Let's give it a chance. Okay, now I'm gonna create a purchase order. I'll pick an item. Okay, that's definitely over 10,000. Go to save. And it says, well, your Intuit account is not linked. That's one of the issues, as I mentioned before. You gotta be logged in into this company file. So I went into draft mode. So I gotta go back. I have to log in into Intuit for this to work. And let me sign out and log into the correct Intuit ID. As I mentioned earlier, this is going to be, for sure, the biggest issue with all these features is making sure the users are logged in with the correct ID for it to interact with all these moving parts. Okay, so now I'm logged in. Let's see if this is gonna work now. I'm gonna make a slight modification to this, just add a memo. Click on save, click on yes. So it triggers, so now it triggers again, and it needs to be sent for approval, and I can say, please approve ASAP. And I go to yes, send for approval. So now you're gonna see the purchase order says pending approval. Again, it's not a posting transaction anyway, but this is a pending PO. So if I go to reports and go to open purchase orders, that purchase order for 120,000 doesn't show because it's not posting per se, even though it's not a posting transaction. It's sitting there on pending approval, and it's not until the admin logs in and goes to track and approve transactions and goes into pending and approves it from here. Now, I technically shouldn't be able to approve my own transaction. So I'm gonna click on approve, see what happens. I can, because there's an error in this. It's a big issue, big problem, is there's a lot of clarity around who can approve things. So even though I said only the admin should be able to approve this, my user happens to have some right that can approve these things. So there's some logical broken problem with this right now. And I'm just kind of showing you what's happening. Like I was able to approve my own PO, which completely renders this tool useless, unless I knew exactly how to configure this user not to be able to approve a transaction. But then now when I go into the purchase order, it says it's been approved, and I go into my report of open purchase orders, and there's my 120,000 purchase order. So that lets you know more or less how that feature works. Like I said, for the most part, it's kind of designed correctly, but all of these things are still just not really well defined. Okay. The last one is item categories. So I'm going to preface by saying this is the least disappointing of the features because this one doesn't have any errors per se. It doesn't have any problems. It's actually working as designed. The problem is you can't do anything with it. So I love this feature. This is probably the top in my wish list to have item categories the way QuickBooks Desktop POS has had for years to solve the item sub-item conundrum we have with these big company files with a lot of items. So this is awesome, and is officially the only feature I care about 2023, and the one that I'm probably going to work hard with the QuickBooks people to get this thing to actually work, because this one will help a lot of my clients that are inventory heavy, item heavy. So let's just talk about what it can do well and what it cannot do well, and then we'll do a quick demo. So what it can do well is it works with most items, inventory, non-inventory, service, and other charge. Beautiful. It currently shows a column in the inventory valuation report, which I love, but it's not very functional because it's not sortable or filterable. It gives you up to 4 layers of categories, so you can have category and subcategories. And it has the potential to fix the big conundrum of sub-item structure, workaround that we do now, which really makes large lists a mess. And this is like inside baseball, like super nerdy thing. But one of the things I really liked about this is when you turn this feature on, all items automatically go into a category called uncategorized. So they don't go into a blank, empty category, which is a similar thing that they solved in the multiple site locations when that was enabled. And this potentially fixes some of the database integrity issues that we have with lot numbers, for example, where they can be blank items with no lot numbers. So I like the fact that every item gets a category, even if it's an uncategorized category, it gets a category. For database integrity issues, that's going to be huge. What it cannot do well, and this is the thing that just drives me insane, is one, you cannot enable this in the Add Edit Multiple Item screen. You cannot import these via Excel, IAF, or the SDK or third party, which means that you have to go item by item to configure each of the items categories. That's horrible. That's torture, actually. Some of my clients have thousands of items. This is complete torture. This doesn't work. It doesn't work. Brand new company file, started from scratch, works well. Big companies with a big item list, that doesn't work. Okay? So you cannot edit, delete, or merge the categories. There is a description field for the categories, but it's not really available anywhere. And the categories have not been added into a criteria for advanced pricing. So in other words, it's got great potential, completely useless. And there's also expiration dates on lot numbers, which we'll showcase as well. So let's go back into QuickBooks and let's go into the list menu. Let's go into item list. And again, this is all enterprise. I pick any of my items and there it is, category. So I can go to add new and call this big items and click on save, click OK. And then I can go into another item and call this small items. Okay. And then you figure out how categories will work for you. So every single item in here has the potential to have a category of sort, a big item or a small item. I have to go into each one and give it a category. It's, again, a little bit of torture for most of us to go through and do that. But then what's really cool is I go into reports, inventory valuation summary, and there's a column with the category. So that's neat. Okay, I love that. Hopefully that's going to solve some of the things that we were doing earlier, which is creating this sort of item and sub-item categorization. Unfortunately, under filters, I cannot anywhere choose category, and I cannot sort. So there's no way for me to sort by this. So while I can't sort or filter, honestly, this is not useful at all. I don't have a revenue report by category. I don't have an inventory item report by category. I really can't use categories anywhere. And if I can't use them anywhere, they're useless. Okay? But I love the fact that they added this. I'm just fascinated by the fact that they added this. Other thing I want to show you is the expiration dates. So here inside advanced inventory, you can turn on categories, and on the advanced inventory, you can do that too. I guess I'm not logged in as an admin, but that's okay. That's what you would turn them on. And then on every item, once you turn on expiration dates, you can choose which of these items you will track lot numbers, expiration dates for. So I come in here, I go to lot numbers and expiration dates, and I can say this item requires a lot number and an expiration. And I can go to a different item and say this item will have a lot number but no expiration, which is really cool. Okay, and then I can pick a different item, let's say this door frame here, and I can say this one gets neither lot number nor expiration. So as I bring the items in via a vendor or whatever, so I bring the items in and I pick a vendor and I pick my items. So I'm going to pick this item, I'll pick that item and the door frame. They're all set up differently. So I'm going to bring, let's say, 3 of each. Okay. And then this one has the ability for me to enter a lot number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The second one, the first one requires a lot number and requires an expiration date. Okay. So the second one, I could just put a lot number and no expiration date. I can't even add it because I configure that item to be like this. And the last one, I cannot add a lot number or an expiration date. So I love the way they executed this, where you can be forced to have to enter a lot number and an expiration date, just a lot number or none at all, which is awesome. Okay. And the way these essentially show up in a report, quote unquote, not really, but here there's a report inventory called lot numbers in stock. And then if I pick any of these that have an expiration date, double click, it will tell me what the expiration date is right there. If I double click on one that doesn't have an expiration date, the expiration date will not even show. So it's pretty neat how that shows up in there. Unfortunately, there are no reports that show sort of items are about to expire or anything like that, which is just completely useless for companies that deal with drugs, for example, medicines that expire. A report like that would be pretty useful. Okay. So what it can do well, I just highlighted. What it cannot do well, again, when lot numbers are required, one of the challenges is there's going to be some people that only need expiration dates and don't need lot numbers. So it's going to be a little bit of a nuisance to have to enter or put a random lot number in there just to use expiration dates. There's no expiration date fields on checks and credit card charges. So if you're bringing in items via a check or a credit card charge, that's not available yet. So you have to use bills. So it's only been enabled in bills. And as I mentioned, there's no expiration date related reports. Oh yeah, and one more thing. You cannot have multiple expiration dates in the same lot. So they have to be different lots to have different expiration dates.